It is wash day, and she starts with the ashes. A week of hearth sweepings goes into a barrel lined with straw. She pours hot water over the top. What drips out of the hole in the bottom is brown, slick between the fingers, and strong enough to take the skin off her hands. Nothing in the house can tell her how strong it is. So she floats an egg in it. Too weak, and the soap will never set. Too strong, and it eats the fat, the pot, and her hands along with it. That barrel is the entire chemical industry of a medieval household. Soap came out of it, and so did clean linen, window glass, gunpowder, and in a few places, dinner. And all of it started as floor sweepings. Today we take that barrel apart. How a family pulled a caustic chemical out of a cold fireplace. How they knew when it was ready without a single instrument, and why this is the rare old method that deserved replacing. Start with the fact that nobody was trying to make a chemical. They were trying to stay warm and cook supper. A medieval household burned wood every single day of its life, and every single day the fire handed back a bucket of grey powder that was in the way. It got swept out. It went on the garden, on the ice, on the midden heap. The interesting part is that this useless leftover turned out to be the one thing the house could not buy, could not grow, and could not do without. The problem it solved was grease. Water does not remove it. You can scrub a wool tunic in a river until your knuckles bleed, and the lanolin and the tallow and the cooking fat will still be sitting in the fibres. Fat and water refuse each other. That is not a medieval problem, it is a chemistry problem, and it applies to a butter churn, a shirt collar, and a pair of hands that have just gutted a pig. To get fat out of anything, you need an alkali. Something at the far end of the pH scale from vinegar. Something that will attack a fat molecule and break it open. There were exactly 3 ways for a European household to get one before the 18th century. Burn wood. Burn certain plants that grow on salt marshes, or burn limestone. That is the whole list. No shop sold it, no chemist made it, and there was no 4th option. Everything you are about to hear grew out of that shortage. Hold on to it, because it does not stay a kitchen problem. 200 years later, that same shortage will have settlers in New England burning their own forests to sell the ash to England, and it will put a fireplace on the very first patent the United States ever issued. For now, though, the ash simply stopped being sweepings and became stock. The method looks crude and is not. You want hardwood ash from oak or beech or hornbeam, because softwood ash from pine is full of resin and yields a weak, tarry liquid that soap makers refused. You want the ash white and fine, which means a hot fire and a clean burn. Damp ash from a smouldering fire is worth almost nothing. The ashes went into a wooden barrel or a hollowed log set on a frame at an angle with a hole bored near the base. The bottom of the barrel was packed with straw, small twigs, sometimes a layer of gravel. That is the filter. Then the ash went in, sometimes a bushel at a time, pressed down in layers, and water went over the top. Cold water works slowly, hot water works faster and pulls more. The first liquid to come through is the strongest, and it was caught in a separate pot and kept apart. Householders called it the first running. What came through afterward was weaker, and it either went back over the ashes to be run through again or got used for lighter work. What is actually happening is straightforward. Wood pulls potassium out of the soil while it grows and stores it in its tissue. Burning drives off everything that can burn, and the potassium stays behind in the ash as a salt. Water dissolves that salt and carries it out the hole in the bottom of the barrel. The barrel is doing extraction, the same operation as brewing a very unpleasant cup of tea. And here is where most accounts of this stop, one step too early, because ash water on its own is not strong enough to do the hardest job. What comes out of that barrel is mostly potassium carbonate. It is alkaline, it will cut grease, It will clean a floor, and it will make a soft, sticky soap that never quite firms up. Try to make a hard bar with it, and you will fail every time. So they added burnt lime. Limestone or chalk or seashells, roasted in a kiln until they turn to quicklime, then slaked with water. Stir that into the ash liquor, and something quite and important happens. The lime trades places with the carbonate. The weak alkali becomes a strong one. The liquid turns genuinely caustic, and now it will do things that plain ash water never could. Medieval and early modern soap recipes call for exactly this: ashes and lime together, and they call for it without a word of explanation, the way a recipe today says to preheat the oven. The reaction had no name yet. The result was obvious enough that it did not need one. But the stronger you make it, the more dangerous the question becomes. How do you know when to stop? This is the part that still does not quite make sense when you sit with it. She is producing a caustic solution whose strength swings wildly depending on the wood, the fire, the season, the water, and how many times it has been run through the ashes. The same barrel gives a different answer every month. You would think somebody would have written the strength down. Nobody did, because nobody could. What they had instead was a set of physical tests, and they are better than they sound. Float an egg in it. Weak lye lets the egg sink. Strong lye is denser, and the egg rises until a patch of shell the size of a coin sits above the surface. That patch is the reading. A potato works the same way if there is no egg to spare. Some households dropped in a feather, and if the barbs went slimy and started to dissolve, the liquid was ready. None of that is folklore. Each of those is measuring something real. The egg and the potato are reading density, which tracks the concentration of dissolved salts. The feather is reading chemical activity directly, because a feather is keratin, and a solution strong enough to digest keratin is strong enough to split fat. She has no idea what a hydroxide ion is. She has a repeatable test that answers the only question that matters, which is whether this batch will work today. The tolerance was not tight either. That is the quiet mercy of soap. Get it roughly right and the process corrects itself, because the fat and the lye consume each other. Which brings us to what the whole barrel existed for. Pour that liquid into rendered animal fat, tallow from cattle or lard from a pig, and heat it. The alkali attacks the fat molecule and splits it into two pieces. One piece becomes glycerin. The other piece is a salt with a split personality, one end that clings to grease and one end that clings to water, and that is the only reason anything in your house ever gets clean. That is soap. It has been made the same way, from those two ingredients, for at least 4,000 years. There is a detail here that people miss, and it reframes the whole thing. Soap is lye with its teeth pulled. The caustic that would burn her hands is gone, consumed, converted into something safe enough to wash a baby with. The dangerous stage was the middle of the process, not the end of it. Now, Geography decided what kind of soap you got, and it decided it absolutely. Inland, where households burned forest wood, the ash gave potassium, and potassium soap is soft. It stays as a brown or black paste, scooped from a crock, perfectly good for laundry and floors, and never sold as a bar in your life. That is what Northern Europe made and used. On the Mediterranean coast, soap makers burned a different fuel, salt marsh plants, glasswort and saltwort, called barilla in Spain, which drink sodium out of the ground instead of potassium. Sodium ash gives sodium soap, and sodium soap is hard. Combine that with the other thing the South had in quantity, olive oil, and you get a pale, firm, odourless bar that can be stacked, shipped and sold at a price no tallow soap ever commanded. Castile, Marseille, Savona, the Ligurian town that most likely gave English the word savon's cousin and the French their soap. Aleppo had been doing it with laurel oil for longer than any of them. 2 soaps, 2 continents worth of reputation, 1 difference. Which plants burned? And now the fireplace leftover reaches further than any of this suggests, because the trick that ran her wash barrel left its name on the science that replaced it. It is hiding in plain sight, and you have almost certainly said it out loud this year. The Arabic word for the ashes of the saltwort plant was Alkali. Chemists took that word and never gave it back, and it became Alkali, the name of an entire category of chemistry. Every alkaline substance on Earth, every antacid tablet, every pH strip that turns blue is carrying a medieval word for burnt marsh plants. The second one is better. In 1807, Humphrey Davy ran an electric current through molten caustic potash and pulled out a soft silver metal nobody had ever seen. He needed a name. He called it potassium, straight from potash, the ashes leached in a pot. On the periodic table, its symbol is not P, it is K, for kalium, the Latin form of that same Arabic word for ashes. There is an element on the wall of every chemistry classroom in the world, number 19, named twice over after the stuff a medieval housewife swept out of her fireplace. She was not doing primitive chemistry. She was doing the chemistry that chemistry was later named after. But soap was the expensive form of this liquid, because making it burned through fat a household would rather have eaten. So the biggest dirty job in the house never got soap at all. Nobody washed clothes weekly. Linen was washed in great batches a few times a year in many households, and the operation was called bucking. The linen went into a wooden tub, the buck layered with a cloth spread over the top. Ash was piled on the cloth, and hot lye was poured through it, again and again, sometimes for a full day. The liquid caught underneath and reheated and sent through once more. Then it was rinsed hard in running water, beaten, and laid out on grass in the sun. The sun was not decoration. Sunlight bleaches, and lye plus sunlight is why medieval linen in inventories is described as white rather than the grey you would expect. The whole cycle could run 2 or 3 days, which is precisely why it happened seasonally and why owning many shirts was a form of wealth. You needed enough linen to last until the next wash. And that job you can do again tomorrow if you want to, because ash and a fire is not a lost technology. If watching this makes you want to put your own hands on the past, that is the whole point of the Medieval Way store. It starts with the Medieval Bakery Collection, the practical recipes book for the dishes themselves, the sourdough manual for keeping a living leaven the old way, and the sourcing guide for finding real heritage grain. The bread is where this kitchen begins. While the wash tub was busy out in the yard, the same barrel was quietly at work in the kitchen. Which sounds like a mistake, given that we have spent this whole time establishing that the stuff dissolves feathers. But the reason it worked on food is the same reason it worked on linen. It attacks protein, and it can be rinsed back out. Scandinavia gives the clearest case. Take stockfish, cod dried on racks until it is hard as board, and it will keep for years, but takes days of soaking to become food again. Soak it in lye instead, and the alkali attacks the protein directly, swelling the flesh into something translucent and jelly-like. The Swedish Archbishop Olaus Magnus described the process in print in 1555. 2 days in strong lye, 1 day rinsing in fresh water, then cook it. That is lutefisk, and it is still eaten every Christmas by people who could not tell you they are eating a chemistry experiment from the age of Gustav Vasa. The rinsing is the whole safety margin. Alkali is never an ingredient. It is a treatment, and the treatment is washed back out before anyone eats. The same logic ran everywhere the technique appeared. European foragers stirred wood ash into the water they used to leach bitter tannins out of acorns, and the alkaline water stripped them faster than plain water could. Across the Atlantic, on a continent that had never heard of any of this, Mesoamerican cooks were doing something considerably cleverer, with maize and wood ash or lime unlocking a vitamin the grain otherwise holds back. Two hemispheres, no contact, the same insight about ashes and food. The habit survived into things you can still buy. That dark, chewy skin on a proper German pretzel is an alkaline bath at work, though the lye those bakers use has been industrial since the 19th century. And a jar labelled potash still sits in German supermarkets every December, sold as a leavener for Lebkuchen, which is potassium carbonate, under an older name. But the household barrel was never the biggest customer. Industry was, and industry was hungry. Glassmakers needed an alkali to lower the melting point of sand, and in the forests of Germany and Bohemia they got it from beech and fern ash, which is why medieval northern glass is called forest glass, and why glassworks were built in woodland rather than near towns. They followed the fuel. Dyers needed alkali to fix colours. Saltpeter makers, tanners and bleachers all needed it. Potash was not a household curiosity. It was a bulk industrial input, and Europe was steadily running short of forest, which is how a fireplace leftover became a transatlantic export. Settlers clearing land in New England, New York, and Canada were burning enormous quantities of hardwood anyway to get at the soil underneath. Instead of wasting the ash, they leached it, boiled the liquor down in iron kettles, and shipped the grey crust to England. The arithmetic is brutal. Roughly 200 bushels of ashes were needed to produce 100 pounds of potash. To make a single ton of it took the standing hardwood off 3 to 5 acres. That is the kind of number that makes a forester wince. But for a farmer with more trees than cash, ash was often the first money the land ever produced. And that trade left a mark nobody expects. On the 31st of July, 1790, the very first patent issued by the United States of America, signed by George Washington, was granted to a man named Samuel Hopkins, not for a loom or an engine or a plough. It was for an improved process of making potash and pearl ash. American patent number 1 is a better way to burn ashes. So this was never a peasant workaround at the edge of the economy. It was the foundation of the chemical economy of the Western world right up until the 1800s. Then it ended, and it ended fast, and this is where the story refuses to flatter the past. In 1791, a French surgeon named Nicolas Leblanc worked out how to make soda ash from common salt instead of plants. It was a filthy process, and it worked. By the 1860s, Ernest Solvay had a cleaner and cheaper method still, and within a generation industrial soda had swallowed the market. Alkali became a thing you bought by the sack, at a known strength, on any day of the year. Compare that honestly with the barrel. The barrel needed a forest. Its strength was never the same twice. Getting it wrong meant ruined soap or a serious burn, and a household that ran out of ash simply had no alkali at all. There was no romance in any of it. This is the one where the modern answer is genuinely better, and pretending otherwise would be an insult to the people who did it the hard way. They were not choosing the ash barrel over something easier. It was that or nothing. What we kept was the vocabulary. The potassium in fertilizer is still called potash, sold by the millions of tons a year, mined from ancient evaporated seabeds half a mile underground. There is no pot involved and no ash, just a word that outlived its own method by 2 centuries. If you want to try it, know 2 things first. Wood ash lye is genuinely caustic and will injure eyes and skin, so it wants gloves, eye protection, and a bucket you do not care about. And a soap made with it will always be soft, because your fireplace gives you potassium and hard bars need sodium. Working soap makers do this every year. It is not difficult. It is just chemistry you cannot measure precisely, which is exactly the problem she was solving with an egg, which is where this lands. The most valuable thing a medieval fire produced was not the heat, and it was not the light. It was the grey powder underneath, the part everyone agreed was garbage, swept up every morning and quietly holding the whole household together. If this is the kind of forgotten knowledge you want more of, subscribe. What surprised you most? The egg, the patent, or the element? Until next time, stay curious.